Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Rogers from Baltimore PD in Ohio. He has 32 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Rogers. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We talked offline a little bit, and I really like some of the things you had to say. Before we kind of hop into today's topic of conversation, I was hoping you could give us a little bit of background into who you are.
I've been here, like say, 32 years. Started as patrolman and kind of worked my way up. It was a part-time department at first. I was chief at that time, but then they made it a full-time position, which I was doing something else at another job, so it wouldn't allow me to take it. And so they brought in the first full-time chief, and then when he retired, I was lieutenant, and then I took over and retired from my other career. And but yeah, I've been here 32 years, and it's been a great time.
I love it. I like to ask this question sometimes, and I'm really actually curious. It's gonna be a two-part, so get ready.
Okay.
The first one is from a professional perspective, what is your why? Why did you get into this career path?
I think the first I was working for a guy, and he would do shows, and the guys that I met that were on the sheriff's department at the time. Just seemed like they had a good time doing what they were doing, working special duty where we were at. And I had a neighbor growing up that was the first detective in Lancaster, Ohio. So he was always telling me stories, and that seemed just very interesting. And I actually wanted to be a park ranger at a state park here in Ohio. Found out that that was like next to impossible to get into because no one ever left that job when they got it. They loved it that much. So that put me over here in the law enforcement side that thinking I'll do this until I can get on it, with the state. And it just never happened. And here we are. So it was just an interest in it looked like a great thing. Um, the cliche of helping people always seems like that's what everybody says, but it is the best part of this job. You know, uh, as I was taking somebody to jail the other day, I said, I really don't like doing that. That's not why I do this. That's just a side piece to it when you have to do it. But, so just the interest in it, and saw how they were helping everybody do what they needed to do at the shows we were doing. And that's kind of how that started.
Yeah.
So.
How do you think that, because I agree with you, and everyone I've talked to who's ever been in this career, I think they say that they wanted to help people, that that's the best part of the job is having the opportunity to help people. How do you maintain the excitement for the job, and how do you stay connected with that why as time goes on? 32 years later, after, kind of letting the realities of the career set in, and I know there's some really high points and some really low points throughout the career. How do you maintain that excitement and connection to your why?
Well, I think it's because you never know what's going to happen. And that opportunity of doing something new in helping somebody in a way you've never done before
Mm.
is just around the corner. And in telling new guys, that say they go in, they do their FTO program and their field training officer program, and then they get out on the road, and one of the first calls they get something they've never handled before. And they're like, but I've never handled this before. And I'm like, I'm 32 years in, and I'll get a call today that I've never handled before because every call is typically different.
Mm.
So I think it's just knowing that there's another one around the corner that you're going to help somebody is what keeps me going and liking to do this. And I love it every day. I mean, a guy told me one time that I rode with when I was a very young officer. He worked for a very large department here in Ohio, and he said, "I can't believe they pay me to do this job. Like
Mm.
if I could do it for free, I'd do it for free." And I thought that was the strangest thing I'd ever heard. I was in year two probably at the time,
Yeah.
and now I see exactly what he's talking about. Don't get me wrong, I'm not doing it for free, but um, that's the thing. Like I say, I enjoy it every day, every
Yeah.
single day. And I think it's the next one. There's something coming around the corner.
I really like that. This is going to sound so cheesy, but the attitude of gratitude, I think that when you can have that mental perspective that you just mentioned of like, one, loving what you do, and then two, understanding that maybe if you are in a hard point, that there's another opportunity to find that purpose around the corner and just reminding yourself of that. And I think that so often we hear people who aren't that way, that have maybe, and it doesn't matter where you are, what career you have. Everyone has experience talking to many different walks of life, where everything feels negative and, there isn't that sense of purpose or gratitude. And I think if you can continue to remind yourself of that, of like, hey, like I get to do this. I'm grateful for the opportunity. And even though this moment is really hard, or maybe this season of my life maybe is hard, I know that around the corner there's another new opportunity that's going to breathe life back into me. And I think that that mindset is trainable. And maybe you are inherently that way, and that's how you've always been. But it's something that I have learned in myself because I personally have a tendency to focus on the negatives. And I have to work really hard every day to wake up and try to counter that and, come up with a few things every day that I'm grateful for to try to maintain that positive mindset.
Yeah, I like I said, I think that that is trainable when you sometimes you put that in somebody that's not thinking that way, and
Mhm.
then they could realize that it's like, hey, today, today was really bad. Today was a super bad day, but t tomorrow you're gonna help somebody. You're gonna find that missing adult that walked away, that doesn't know, where they're at or anything like that. You're gonna help a lost child that find their parents or whatever. So yeah, I definitely think that that's the way it needs to be thought of for sure.
Yeah. And I would imagine the more, because I really am a believer that negativity is contagious. And I also think positivity is contagious. And when you can have someone like yourself in leadership who is saying, like, hey, I'm 32 years into this and I'm pinching myself because I get to wake up every day and do this job, like I'm still so happy to be here. And giving that perspective of like, hey, I know it's hard, but maybe tomorrow it's going to be even better. And you never know when that next opportunity is, to
Mhm.
provide value and to change someone's life. That the more conversations, then the more culture of positivity that you can create organizationally.
Yeah, and it's tough because there's a ton of negativity that you
Yeah.
deal with every day, which is part of this whole mental aspect of it, right? Is that you just, you go through, you know, I forget what the number was. You probably know it, 800, 900 major trauma issues in an average career of a police officer, where the average person gets like 200 in their entire lifetime.
Yeah.
So, there's a ton of negativity, and you just got to take it and go with it and move on down the road. So it's not as easy as it seems sometimes, but we
Yeah.
get there.
I want to talk about that a little bit because, obviously your profession is an extremely challenging one. And there's this idea of not taking work home and not taking home to work.
Mhm.
How do you do that?
Well, you know, it's tough sometimes to do, but you really, I think, have to separate the two. And most of the things that you do during the day, you're probably not going to want to talk about first off with especially at home. And to realize that home is home and the things that happen there have nothing to do with here, and vice versa. Um, the bringing home here, you it's kind of just the opposite, but it's also the same maybe, because if you're having problems at home, you're probably not going to perform right here.
Mhm.
So knowing that that's a home thing, just because the babysitter was late or something, that just started off the day bad and then you were late and you got in trouble at work because you were late. And it's like, but leave that there and do your job at the best you can, regardless of that. Um, I think is the way. Now, how to train people to do that, that's a tricky thing there because other than just explaining it to people and maybe, programs that explain it better than what I can for, to somebody, but just I usually tell the guys if that stuff happens, I said, they may come in and say something about what happened last night or this morning. And I just tell them, I say, you know, talk them through it a little bit and say, you know what, but that's home and it's okay and you'll be good. Just go out and do what you got to do. And then on the flip side of that, when they have an incident here, and we just have to talk about it a little bit and ask them if they're okay, hey, you good? And say, hey, when you get home, your kids are going to want to play and they're going to want to do stuff. Just do that. Just go home and do that. So, um,
I mean, the one thing that I heard in there is kind of that extra step of like talking about it, having the opportunity to offload it, and then be able to move forward from that. And I do think that having conversations about things is really powerful, and it gives you the opportunity to, kind of unpack some of that stuff. And
yep.
maybe, that was intentional or not, but this idea of before you go home, talking about some of that stuff with maybe leadership or peers and like trying to offload some of those things before you step into your home so that you can be present with your family, and then vice versa, being able to talk about some of the stuff that's going on at home, kind of unpack, load it, and then see if we can move forward. And I would imagine that's so incredibly challenging. And there's a lot of compartmentalizing that I think that you guys have to do, because to your point, like you still have calls for service, there's still things that you guys need to do. And then there's still this conversation of that you're human and not robots, but then you're expected to like leave this at home and then come to work and do the best job that you possibly can and bring your A game, which is incredibly challenging for anyone to be on their A game 100% of the time anyway. But for law enforcement, it's expected. And then go home and be on your A game and be the best dad or mom or husband or wife that you possibly can be. And so I really commend you guys for the hard work that you do, because I don't think that I could do that. Like, even just regularly, I don't think that I could come with my A game in every scenario. And it's literally expected of you 24/7 to be able to do that. My one question for you is, and this is kind of an interesting concept that I think we talked about a little bit, is when, and you said performance earlier. So you said, sometimes you start to notice performance on the job or maybe performance at home, like some things that are, maybe going on that are indicators of things, maybe going on under the surface that need to be addressed. And when they go home, how do you think that we can, or you can, or organizations can better equip the families to be able to maybe recognize some of the things, to understand the realities of the career, and be able to have all the tools that they need to be able to identify, maybe some of the flags, or to be able to also be able to process things themselves and get through those things. How do you think that we can better equip families?
Well, I think programs for prior when an officer first comes on, programs for families of just that,
Mhm.
of, you know, once again, it's not easy to just say, hey, every time you come home, you have to absolutely be this non-cop, not thinking about it, like you can't do anything. That's just unrealistic to think that that's going to happen every single day. Because I can tell you from personal experience, that's not the case. There have been times where it's like, holy cow, I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to, I just needed to be alone, and sort through some of the things that happened that day, or usually it's just one incident that causes that kind of stuff of a shift. But programs for families of you know of of spouses that, like, how was your day? And if it's like, oh, it was good. Well, if nothing else was said, that's probably because there was something bad that happened that day,
Yeah.
or something they don't want to talk about. And I don't have all the cues and indicators that some professionals might be able to speak of better for that. But I think there should be some kind of program like that that's easily accessible for spouses to get into, to understand some of those things, and that maybe that's not the time to argue about a bill. You know what I mean? Or something like that. Maybe catch that and go, let's just let that rest until tomorrow, and it'll be a better time for that. And that's not blaming fault or on anybody. It's just I think understanding a little bit of that stuff from people that aren't in this career would be helpful for both sides going forward. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you said like it's good, it's fine. And I was we had this conversation. It was kind of this like back and forth on LinkedIn that everyone was kind of like sharing, and it was the F word, the I'm fine.
yeah.
And um oh, I'm gonna have to look it up and share it with you because they used FINE as an acronym. And I know you guys love your acronyms, and I'm like, I always try to keep up with the with the acronyms.
Right?
But it was something about like unspoken emotions or like it was something like that, like the F word, fine, and
Mhm.
they made it into
Yeah.
an acronym. And I do find that, whenever, and I do it too. When someone's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "I'm fine." Like when I say I'm fine, I'm probably not fine.
Right.
Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
and so I agree. And I've heard some agencies talk about, kind of like a family onboarding, with new hires and bringing the spouses or the immediate family in and kind of just trying to give them an idea of maybe what, their family member or spouse is stepping into in this career. But to my knowledge, it's, maybe one day or a short training of that. So I'm curious if maybe there is an opportunity to have more extensive training on the front end, to be more proactive with preparing the families for the career and maybe what those signs are or how to communicate or, and just having almost like, I don't want to say like family counseling, but almost something maybe to that extent where it's like, hey, like these are the things to look for. And but then I'm also curious, and you kind of brought this, to my mind that I've never thought about before. How do we prepare the employee and the families on the back end of their career? I've never heard of any sort of like transition training for either. I hear that, there's a little retirement party, maybe there's a cake. I know you said that you get a badge, and then it's like they close the door and you're gone. And we know that that transition can be really tricky. And, we see different results of that, and I've talked to quite a few retirees that have talked about, kind of feeling like you just completely lose the camaraderie, you lose your purpose, not really knowing what to do or like where you fit in. And I had one person tell me, and this really stuck with me. I was like, wow, they said that they were so afraid to retire because they didn't know their family anymore. And so,
Back to the first part, right? Of
yeah.
taking it home and make that separate, because so you don't have
Yeah.
that happen right there. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I also wonder, and this is maybe just food for thought, maybe there's an opportunity on the back end to have some better training and preparation for the officer to retire. And then for the families as well, because, they've spent the last 20, 30 years where you've been gone a lot and, that was your life and your career and now you're home all the time. And so how do you prepare for that too? So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I thought that was an interesting thought.
No, I think for sure on both ends, both again, the officer himself and the spouse, because I know that I've had the opportunity to spend some time with now retired officers that were the cops in the town I grew up in.
Hmm.
And like I remember them on duty, when we were racing cars and doing crazy stuff, and like, oh, hey, there's such and such and there's such and such, and the cops. And in very recent times within the last year, I've got to spend some time with those guys, like at the shop, talking. And you could just tell that they were living life to the fullest right there, telling stories that I could relate to because I grew up in that town where there were cops. And when
Hmm.
they talked about certain places or certain events that happened in that town, I could say, oh, yeah, I was there, or different things. And you could just tell that, and these guys have been retired for 15 years now and or more. And I think those kind of things of getting together with other people, you know what I mean, that have the same background, even if they weren't cops at the same place, but that where they could talk about their stuff. Because once you retire, like you say, if you're not around people that are cops, they're probably not going to tell stories about certain things or whatever. So from the officer's perspective of an out of, hey, here's what to expect. Like you say, the camaraderie. I think there's an avenue for that. And then again, for the families as well, there's probably something of, and every officer is going to be different. Some may handle it differently than others, and some may not have any of the things that they want to that a program might tell the spouses to look out for. And it's like, because some people can't wait to retire because they just want to be on their boat fishing all the time. And other guys, like you said, they retire and go, well, what am I going to do? Just going to
Yeah,
sit around. And most retirees don't really come back to their department and hang out. It's just not something that happens. So
right.
um, I think there's a space for that, definitely.
I think so too. And I mean, I do really value the importance of nothing being a one size fits all. I
Right.
think that everyone's going to have different perspectives, different needs. And so maybe understanding the individuals that you're working with and trying to figure out how you can best support that particular person, I think is always going to be beneficial. I've also heard, some organizations, will have like monthly lunches or, something where they invite like all the retirees and they do like
Yep.
a picnic or a lunch. And so I think that there are better ways to maybe support retirees and, try to prepare for that transition in advance. Like maybe this is something where, you're a year or two out. Like, let's start talking about it. Let's start
Yep.
like figuring out like what's next. Do you have hobbies? Are you gonna enter into a different career? What does that look like? Are you gonna be fishing? Are you gonna be traveling? Like what, and like trying to maybe have kind of that like exit strategy that's gonna best support the individual, and then of course on the front end, and then throughout the career. But I really like that idea of also including families in on those conversations because
Yep.
ultimately they're walking through this career with you,
Yeah.
far into retirement too.
Mhm.
You had um, talked about wellness with me and the importance of wellness. And there was something that you said to me, and I wanted to pull this up because it really stuck with me. You said giving officers tools to do the job includes wellness. What does that look like?
Well, I think from several perspectives of um, giving them the opportunity to, like, say, whether it be gym memberships or uh, things that aren't necessarily related to the department job, whether it be, for instance, it could be going out and shooting, but not for qualifications, right? Just going out and having fun and cooking burgers and hot dogs and just spending some time together to with the people they work with when you're not doing the things that we may not want to do.
Right.
You're not stressed, you're not doing stuff, you're just having a good time with each other, going out to dinner, things like that. But then on the flip side, people that, you know, if recognizing if someone may need a program that from things they're saying, that they want, you think, man, that person may need a little bit of extra help, and going and offering that, finding it, having a program for whether it be a mental health situation or just a health situation where it's like, hey, look, I see you're hurting today. maybe maybe you just need to take the day off. Just go home. Just go home. We'll cover it. We got it covered. Um, for smaller departments, larger programs are a little bit more difficult for smaller departments. But there are things out there here locally. Um, a group got together, started by some dispatchers for wellness for officers. And they're like, call us anytime. They've all been to training. They're here to talk about stuff, whatever you need. And being a dispatcher, that gives them a little bit more insight because they're not just an outsider, because they know, what's happening. Um, they kind of know what went on, maybe even, and they can talk to you about it and make it go through. But again, it's a little bit tough. On the wellness now from a physical aspect, I know that changing the norm, we had spoke about external vest carriers,
Yeah.
and I know for me personally, after 29 years of carrying a gun belt with all my stuff on it, and then change into an external carrier that carries everything on the front. And my back problems immediately went away from what I used to have. And several officers have told me that. And that's an interesting thing about, when they're like, hey, can we go to external carriers? I'm like, yeah, let's try and see how it goes. And it's like, fine. I always say if there's no good reason to not do it,
Mm.
then do it. Why not? So
Um,
um, I think those things are a little bit helpful for that.
I like that earlier you said like having awareness and looking at people and saying maybe they need extra, or maybe they, we need to ask them, are they okay? And, having that sense of care and, again, I was going to say awareness about what's going on around you. And sometimes I think we get so stuck in like what we have going on that we forget to like open up our eyes and look around a little bit.
For
Um,
sure.
but, to your point of, kind of having the ability to adapt and having an open mind to different ways of doing things, how did you create that mindset for yourself? Because I know that there are a lot of people who are maybe stuck in like an older, I'm going to put quotes, like an older mentality of like how things quote unquote should be, rather than kind of having that open mind to say, you know what, like if there's not a good reason not to do it, why not try it? How did you get there? And like maybe what advice would you have to other people to have more of that open mind?
Well, one of the things like when I was saying, if there's no good reason not to, because when people used to say, hey, can you cover a shift for me? And like, I may not have wanted to cover it, but I didn't have a reason to not cover it, and they needed the day off for whatever the reason is, so I would cover it. And I
Mm,
used to tell people that all the time, be like, and once again, back to the family thing, right? With my wife, she'd like, I thought we were going to do this. And I go, yeah, but I don't have a really good reason to not cover it. And he obviously needs my help. That's what I don't mean help like, emergency help, but right.
yeah.
He needed something and asked me to cover it. And I don't have I'd rather sit on the front porch and watch the world go by, but I'm going to go cover his shift for him. So I think it started with some of that kind of stuff. Now, of
Mm,
course, if you ask my officers, they'd probably say that I don't do any of this. But but again, there's a lot of things when people, hey, we have a lot of flexibility in our shift, and I think just we're in our department. And a lot of times when people, hey, my kids got this or got that, you care if I leave an hour early? And I'm like, no, that's fine. Because again, if there isn't a good reason for me to say no, then I'm going to say yes because they need something. And I want to give them as much latitude as I can, but a lot of times I have to tell them, but remember, if I tell you no, it's because there's a reason. It's not just because I say no, because I don't care. You know what I mean? Like I may not care. So um, I don't know. I just maybe it's being treated how you want to be treated, and having sometimes in the past when that wasn't the case, and maybe I just want to turn that around because I don't want somebody to feel like I felt maybe.
Yeah.
Or I've seen other people do maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that you learn from those experiences, but I think that ultimately people want to feel valued and like they matter. And a lot of the things that you're talking about, if someone needs a day off because they want to spend time with their family or go to their kids, soccer tournament or whatever it is, and you just say every time, no, like you can't do it, or no, I'm not going to take your shift. That person is not going to feel valued, in their life. Or if every idea that someone brings up to leadership and is like, hey, can we try this? Can we try that? And everything is just no, 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 then again, they're not going to feel like they're a valued member of that organization or that their opinion matters.
Mhm.
And someone presented this to me one time, and I really liked this. It's almost like reverse psychology a little bit, but I think it's really effective, and it's something I ask myself. So when someone presents something with me, our knee-jerk reaction is always no, for the most part. Maybe not you.
Yeah.
You're a yes guy, but for the most part, if you notice when you talk to people and you say something, it's like no, like almost immediately without even like any thought process, or if someone says, "Are you interested in this?" It's like, "No." Can we do this? No. And so someone presented this to me one time and they said, "Ask yourself, are you opposed to this?" And then like it kind of like gets your brain into like almost like I don't want to say triggers, but like almost encourages like a thought process of like, am I opposed to that? No or yes or and so like giving
Mhm.
yourself a moment to like think, not like do you want this, are you opposed to this,
Right.
because I do think it shifts your mind a little bit to think in a different way. And so I really liked that, and I try to ask myself when I'm making decisions, am I opposed to this, yes or no, and then if I am opposed to it, why?
Right.
And if I
And
don't, and if you don't, to your point, if you don't have a good reason why, because sometimes if you're like, yes, I am opposed to that, and you're just like, why? And it's like, well, because that's how I've always done it. That's not really
oh
a good
yeah.
enough answer. Like I've always done it that way. It's like really
Yeah.
why. So maybe
And
that's
we changed when I took over, and nothing against the former chief. He's a great guy, did a great job with the department. He was here chief, I think, 16 or 17 years. So I
oh,
mean,
long time.
not and that was his second retirement. He had
Mhm.
retired from another police department after 20 years. But anyway, um, and I always try to tell if the answer is no for something, I always try to tell them why. Like not just no, but why the no. And because again, as we just spoke about, because if I don't have a reason that I can tell them no, then why wouldn't I say yes? So, like I said, don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of things that people have asked. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that because of, and then I spit out the answer as to why. And I think that goes a long way instead of just hearing no,
Right.
and I think I actually got that from coaching, but that's a whole nother story. But that's what I would do is explain. You just say, go over here and do this. If you explain why they need to do that and what happens if they don't do it, they get it and they'll perform
Yeah.
it flawlessly every time because they understand the why.
Yeah.
So it's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I like that a lot. And I think that the younger generation especially really wants to know the
Oh
why,
yeah, for sure.
behind things. And I'm that way too. If someone says no, typically generally always want to know
Oh yeah,
why. So I
yeah,
think that's human nature, but I think especially with the younger generation. So I like that method. You
yeah.
had talked a little bit to me about um, how physical and mental injuries are similar. You kind of compared the two. Why do you think that when someone has a physical injury, there's really not a lot of stigma or pushback when you have to address a physical injury? But then when it comes to maybe the more like invisible, hidden, mental side of things, there's
Mhm.
still kind of that um, maybe pushback, we can say stigma, or people find it hard to address those things within themselves. Why do you think that is?
Well, with those type of issues, I think a lot of things like if an officer decides that he's, you know, like you might think maybe that he's having some thoughts of self-harm or something like that, just things are going so bad. And you start to wonder, and I think because we don't really know, how is that going to affect in the job? If he's thinking like that interpersonally, maybe is the word, maybe not, but then how does that affect the job? And does that mean he's going to be a poor performer? Does that mean he's going to be irrational out on the road? How is that going to affect it? And because just mental health type things are such a taboo, conversation in just about any line of work, but let alone ours. But I think because of the things that we have to do and the decisions we have to make at snap decisions, a lot of times that, quite frankly, sometimes are a wrong decision, but you had to make a decision right then and you didn't even have all the information you needed, but you had to make a call right then. No, you didn't have a second to think about it. That how will those mental issues maybe determine the outcome of some of those work related decisions? And
Yeah.
I think there's just a stigma that if you are having some kind of bad thoughts there, you're going to have them at work. And the two just don't mix.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I find it really interesting. I think the question that popped into my head, and this is not a judgment because I've been here before in my life, in my career, but I think the question is like, where did we get to the point where the job was more important than our own health and wellness? Like,
Yeah.
how did we get to that point where a job is more important than you in your life? And I've done that. Like I said, I've been there. And so I'm guilty of that. But I think it's really interesting because if you break your arm, you might not be able to do your job for a
Right.
little bit of time, right? Like you're not
Mhm.
going to be out there, doing the full capacity of what you normally do when you have a broken arm.
Yep, for sure.
But no one is ever like, oh my gosh, I broke my arm. My career is over and I'm never ever going to be able to do it again, right? Like usually you're like, okay, like maybe 6 to 8
Yeah.
weeks, I'll be back out and be good to go. But then when it comes to like mental health, there's not that same attitude or conversation of like, yeah, like maybe I do need to take like a little bit right now and like get the support that I need to, in a few weeks be good to go and I can do my job to the full capacity, maybe even better than I did before. And so I hope that the conversation starts going in that direction where there's an understanding that like one, you as a human being are more important than any career out there.
Oh, for sure.
Your life is more important than a job, but also, physically, there's times where you might have to take care of yourself. You might need to like, take a breath and the
Mhm.
same goes mentally, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not fit for the job or that you're never going to be able to do the job again, but it just means that you need to take some time to take care of you.
Yeah, I think definitely when something like that happens, there needs to be some kind of where it's like, well, you don't have any sick time and you don't have any vacation time, so I don't know what to tell you. It's like, nah, there needs to be some avenue to get that accomplished because people need that time off to reset and like I say, find programs, find different things, whatever it might be to do. I know I was just talking to somebody about meditation the other day,
Yeah.
and it was weird because this person you would not ever think was going to say this
Yeah.
and said that in 15 minutes he felt like he was thinking way more clear, like a burden had been lifted. And that was the first time that he wouldn't even have thought of doing this.
Mhm.
And he, to hear him say this, it's just not the person you would think would say it. And that opened my eyes a little bit to that, thinking, wow, I've heard the things of sports figures doing yoga, and different things, and everybody kind of laughs at me like, wow, it improved my game. Like I was such a better player. You know what I mean? When it helped me. And but then when this meditation thing came up with him, and I was like, wow, that says a lot. Maybe I need to look into this.
Yeah, it's
So
always the people you don't expect. And it's really funny because I've been in this world for a long time. And um, you all like, I always get people that are like, oh, like, that must be tough. Must be tough to get people to do these things. And to a certain extent, sure. Like, like I said before, it's not a one size fits all. There's always going to be different things for different people, but it's always the people who everyone's like, that is like the toughest, strongest
yep,
guy or girl, and they'll never ever do any of this. And I'm like, but they are. And
yep.
it's helping them. And the science speaks for itself. There's so many things out there. It doesn't have to be meditation. You can do, there's a lot of different resources, breathing techniques, mindfulness, grounding, meditation. There's tons of different things that you can do. But they're effective. And I think that the first step is always the hardest step. But it's these types of conversations where, it takes that person that like you see as someone being very strong to say, I do this and this works for me, for
Yeah.
it to like you perked up a little bit and you're like, maybe I should try that, because before maybe when we hear these things, people think of them as being weak or soft or like
Mhm.
woo woo hippy dippy stuff. And you're like, I'm never going to do that. But then, like
Right.
someone who you really respect and you value says, I do it and it works. Now you're listening and now you're going to try and then you're going to tell someone else. And that's like that ripple effect that we're looking for
Mhm.
when it comes to any sort of, proactive wellness resource. So thank you for sharing that because I've heard that time and time again. And I'm really happy that now at least maybe you're like, huh, maybe I should try.
Right.
I think that is the number one question, and that's kind of one of my last questions here is how do you think that we get people to prioritize themselves? I think that's the hardest thing because you guys are so good at taking care of other people. There's lots of things that are being offered organizationally, but then it's the question of like, how do you get people to take control over their own wellness and to actually take advantage of these things?
As you said, you must talk when I think of my guys, and I'm thinking there ain't no way. You know what I mean? They're just not gonna do it. Some kind of an integration to where I don't want to say they don't know it's happening, but some kind of easing into where they're doing one thing, but it's leading them down that path.
Mm,
So whether it's, and I make it up because I'm just thinking about it now, but like, you have a even a hey, we're gonna have a family cookout, right? With all the guys, we're all coming in, and then there's somebody there that's trained in that stuff that just wants to sit and talk to the guys for a while. You know what I mean? To where it, and maybe that gets them into the know a little bit, and in it, the atmosphere instead of, okay, we're going to go into this classroom, this very sterile classroom, and a guy's going to come up and talk, and everybody's sitting there, man, I don't want to do this. I want to be out on the road. I don't want to do this. But if you put it into some kind of an atmosphere that's laid back, and you gradually, instead of dumping it on them, I think it's more of a gradual thing would get them there a little better.
mm,
Uh, some people are just not going to buy in. They're just not going to do it. And
yeah,
and and that's just how it is. And not focusing on the ones that just turn it off, they just turn it off. It's like, well, you can only help the ones you can help.
yeah.
So not get discouraged by the ones that say no. And if out of five people, if one person jumps on board, then you've saved one person. So
Yeah. I was actually
understanding that.
Yeah, and I was just having that conversation recently where this gentleman who's he was like a wellness coordinator, and he said it's the power of one. And he's like, if we could help one person, and we've heard this before, if we can help one person, if we can save one life. And I think that, of course, we want to help as many people as possible, right? Like
Sure.
that's my mission always is how can we help as many people as we possibly can. I think sometimes the conversation is like, oh, well, there's always going to be people who are not going to do it, and I agree with you. Like there's always people in that briefing room, if we're doing something that Like there's one or two with their arms crossed and they're rolling their
Mhm.
eyes and they're like, but I think sometimes and I've done this too, maybe you kind of write that off of like, oh, well, they're just never going to do it. And that might be true, but it also just might not be the time.
Right.
Maybe they're
For
not
sure.
wanting to do it now, but maybe something happens 3 months from now where they're like, oh, now I need it, or now I'm ready. And to have those resources available proactively so that if and when they are ready, they have it. You
Yep.
know? And maybe, like you said, maybe it's never, but I've been places in my life before where I was like, I will never ever do this ever. You can't, like, if you try to make me, I'm gonna kick and scream the whole way. There's just no way. And then like fast forward 5, 10 years, and here I am, and I'm like, oh, now I am doing these things. And I think people change, things change, and just, realizing that if people aren't ready now, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be ready in the future.
Sure.
So,
Mhm.
my last question for you is for the younger generation. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Well, I would say, we put on a bulletproof vest, but you're not bulletproof. Like, stop with that. It's just not how it is. Take time to care for yourself, get an outlet that is something you love to do, whether it's with family or without or whatever. Find something to do that is something you like that you get to spend some time doing, especially with young officers. They have young families a lot of times, just getting married, all this kind of stuff going on. You got to take time for yourself. You got to get away from the job, um, and talk about incidents that happen. Talk about them with somebody. I mean, another officer even, which sometimes that goes, you got to pick the right guy for that. But whether it's you know, clergy or a therapist of some sort, or even sometimes a spouse, depending on what it is. But talk about the issues. Don't just hold it back, and then understand that that happened. It's in the past. Deal with it accordingly, and then move on down the road because there's somebody around the corner that wants you there, that needs you there, and that you're going to help. So that's probably the best advice I could give somebody, I suppose.
Thank you.
Mm.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on here and talking to me about wellness. I really, really appreciate it. And that's all I have for you. But if there's anything else that I missed, let me know. I'll kind of let you do a signature, but thank you again.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's good talking to you.
Of course.